Thank you for inviting me to the Kehilat Hadar mini virtual Shavuoton. It's really nice to see many of you. I know we've got people from many different places tuning in, so it's wonderful to see you. And what we're going to do together today is spend some time with a bracha that is familiar to many of you, and do a close reading of where it comes from and what it can tell us about our relationship with our bodies, with our health, with the Torah, and with Hashem. I live in the Boston area in Newton, and I'm a physician. I'm a geriatrician, and I've got 3 young kids who go to Jewish day school, and I was asking them about the Asher Yatzar blessing, and the school we have sent our children to has taught even the 7-year-old to basically say the Asher Yatzar from memory. So they started reciting it to me, and you've got the text of the blessing right here at the top of the source sheet. But actually what came up and what I want to share with you before we jump into the source sheet is my daughter, who just turned 10, she was born while we were living in New York and attending Kehilat Hadar. She told me about the poster that they have at their school outside the bathroom. Some of you may have seen this poster or some version of it before. It's an Asher Yatzar poster. I don't know much about its provenance, but I can tell you that it made a big impression on my kids. In fact, my daughter quoted me, even though she hasn't been physically in the school building in several months, she quoted me some of the words of advice around the bracha itself, that it reminds us not to take life for granted, that the bracha reminds us that our bodies are a vessel for Hashem's creation, and that we relate to this bracha in so many different ways across the lifespan. You can see on the poster, you'll probably note the lack of women on the poster, but you can see that there's like a stages of life at the bottom right of the poster. And one of the things we're going to do today is think about how this bracha carries different meanings during the time of a pandemic, in our day-to-day lives, and across the lifespan. We'll start at the beginning, and we'll start just by reading the bracha through once, just so we have the words fresh in our mind before we delve deep into both its context and its close reading. So the bracha begins with a regular opening, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher Yatzar et ha'adam b'chokhmah, who formed the human being with chokhmah, with wisdom, uvaravo, and created within the human being, Nekavim, openings upon openings, like nekava, an opening or a hole, chalulim, hollow organs is the translation here, but tubes upon tubes, like the word chalil for flute. Galui v'yadua lifnei chisar chavodecha, it is revealed and known before your holy throne. She'im yipateach echad mehem, if one should become opened when it ought to be closed. O yisatem echad mehem, or one should become closed when it ought to be open. I efshar lehit kayem v'la'amod lefanecha, it would be impossible to stand before you, to exist, to be alive, to survive, to stand before you, God. And then in some versions, we have in the parentheses, afilu sha'a achat, even for a single moment. Baruch Atah Hashem, the bracha concludes, Rofeh chol basar, healer of all flesh, umafli la'asot, and wondrous creator, or one who does wonders, one who does miracles. There are numerous questions that come up when you read this bracha. And actually, just to get us all thinking, especially since I know where I am, it's a beautiful day outside and I'm kind of getting into the zone, I'd like for everyone to type into the chat a question that comes up for you reading the text of this bracha. So take a minute and look at the text and think of a question that you have. It could be a word choice. It could be a context question. But think of a question that the phrasing brings up for you and type it into the chat box. While you are doing that, because it always takes a minute on Zoom, I'm going to play Josh Wershov's piece, Rabbi Josh Wershov's piece, Asher Yatzar.
Today for me is a new day on earth. I live it in awe and wonder how everything works. Should the grass cease to grow? Should the sun cease to glow? Should my heart cease to beat? I can.
So we've got one question, and I invite you all, as we're going through, think of what other questions you have. Thank you, Marian, for the question, the noticing the repetition, the parallel language. What are the implications for people with disabilities, Crohn's, colitis? We're actually going to look at a source specifically about that, so thank you for that question. What does hollow organs mean? What does it mean that it would be Efshar lahit kayim, that it would be impossible to exist if one of these were not to function? It's not how we experience the body today when technology keeps things open artificially, even when they fail. Interesting question. What does the phrase Yatzar es ha'adam b'chokhmah, what does that mean? Where does the wisdom come from? God or people? What does it mean, galui v'yadu? These are excellent questions. What do we mean, she'im yipatech echad mehem? Are we dealing only with the physical body or the psychological implications? Is it impossible to survive? Obviously, you can't stand. Why is it lahikayim v'la'amod? So you can see these are wonderful questions. Thank you. You can see that we could probably spend more than an hour just thinking about all these different questions. We're going to get to a lot of these in our session. And I love Stephen's question. We're supposed to say it after using the bathroom. Are we only to say it if everything is okay? So these are many of the questions that animate this get at the deepest questions of what it means to be alive, what it means to inhabit a body, to not take its functions for granted. And we're going to answer a lot of these as we go through the close reading. So thank you for getting us started with these questions. Now, to fully appreciate this bracha, we have to look at the context in which this bracha appears in the Gemara. And this will kind of answer Rachel's question, why wasn't the subject covered in the daily brachot? So for those of you who recently completed Masachet Brachot as part of Daf Yomi, you probably did notice that the Asher Yatzar comes in a succession, not quite with the daily brachot, but of special blessings that ought to be said on particular occasions. So if you look at the Gemara in brachot, there's a series of statements as we're going through the special brachot that we say, that we should say on particular occasions. So even starting a few baraitot back, the Gemara talks about, okay, bana bait chadash, if you buy a new house, what should you say? If you mivarach al hara'ah, if something bad happens, what should you say? If your wife is pregnant, what should you say? If you are going on a journey, what should you say? So we have paragraph after paragraph and baraita after baraita, speaking of what bracha should you say for these specific instances in our lives. So then before we get to our bracha, the previous two baraitot have to do with entering places of danger. So hanichnas lakrach, one who goes into a wilderness or a town, what should you say? And we get a bracha asking God to protect us. And a bracha of gratitude. Yehi ratzon lefanecha Hashem Elokai shetachniseni lichrach hazel l'shalom. When you enter the city, that God should protect me and I should enter in peace. And once you get in, you say modeh ani lefanecha Hashem Elokai sheichnasti lichrach hazel l'shalom, because you brought me in peacefully. So there's this recognition that these liminal moments of transitioning from place to place are fraught with potential danger. And those ought to be times when we spontaneously pray to God to protect us and thank God for that protection and don't take it for granted. This is where we also get the Tfilat HaDerech is in that baraita. So that's two before ours. The one before ours is Tanya Rabbanan, Hanichnas lebeit hamerchat. When you go into the bathhouse, into the shower house, what should one say? And again, we have asking God to protect us, save us as we go into this, guarding us from sin. And there's a whole discussion around exactly what should be said. I bring up the larger context because it ends right before our bracha. The part about going into the Beit Merchatz ends with going in to have blood let. Hanichnas lahakiz dam. Someone who is going in to have their blood let, which was, of course, state-of-the-art medical treatment in the time of the Gemara. So what should they say? Yehi ratzon mifanecha Hashem Elokai, sheyehe esek zeh li lirfuah u'tir pa'eni. A kavanah that may this medical procedure save me. Think about that. That isn't something that has entered into our normative Jewish practice. But what would that look like if before we went in to have our blood drawn, before we went in for a physical exam, we said a kavanah, may we be healed by this procedure? Certainly as a doctor, I would love to have a kavanah to say when entering into a clinical encounter, whether in person or over the screen, as I'm doing a lot of these days. So that section concludes with a whole meditation on Rapo Yirapeh, the biblical injunction that actually comes from the discussion of two people in a fight and one injures the other and you have to pay damages. Rak Shivto Yivten Rapo Yirapeh from the book of Shemot. This idea that Rapo Yirapeh, paying damages when someone is injured, the double language there, Rapo Yirapeh, is where we learn that doctors have permission to heal. So that discussion around bloodletting ends with the following words that one should say when leaving the bloodletter: Baruch Rofeh Chinam. Blessed is the one who heals for free. That perhaps your copay for the bloodletter was significant, or you hadn't reached your deductible yet, and so you should leave by thanking God as the true source of healing, that God doesn't ask us for any copays or deductibles for healing. So all of that precedes our Baraita, which is at the top of Daf Samech. And I give you that context so you can get the sense that the rabbis are giving us tools to use for when we enter these liminal spaces, these times where we're vulnerable. And this is when we read what you can see here shared on the screen, source 2 in the source sheet. Hanichnas lebeit hakiseh, one who enters the bathroom, literally the house of the chair, the throne room, and we'll talk about that language of kiseh. What should they say? So there's an entryway prayer, which is not entered normative Jewish practice, and you'll see in a moment why not. Hitkabdu mechubadim kadoshim mashartei elyon. Be honored, my honored holy angels on high. Tnu kavod lelohei Yisrael. Bring honor to the God of Israel. Harpu mimeni ad she'ekanes. Leave me while I go in to the bathroom. Ve'eser ritzoni, and I will do what I desire. I'll do what I need to do. Va'avo elechem, and I will come back out to you. So that's the original blessing, this idea that they're ministering angels that accompany us throughout life, but they can't come into the bathroom. It is not a holy place. They cannot come in. And so we're asking them, wait for me outside. Now, in the days of the Gemara, there weren't bathrooms in the homes. Typically, they would go out to the fields, maybe to an outhouse. And so it was a more dangerous act, just going to relieve oneself. And this idea that the angels couldn't come with you. So here you're leaving your protection to go to the bathroom. It's a very vulnerable time, asking the angels to wait for you, much as, a parent might stand outside an outhouse waiting for their child to use the porta potty. I'm right here. Maybe the parent would go inside, or for an older kid, maybe they're right outside. But that image of like, wait for me. I need to know that you're there for me when I come out. So, but now there's a disagreement about what should you actually say to the angels. So Abaye says, La lema inash hachi. Don't say it that way. Dilma shavki leva asle. Then the angels will leave him there and abandon him. Going into the bathroom and telling the angels to go away is putting you at risk. Rather, ela lema shimruni shimruni. Guard me, izruni, izruni. Help me, help me. Simchuni, simchuni. Support me, support me. Hamtinuli, hamtinuli. Wait for me. Ad she'ekanes ve'etzeh sheken darkan shel bnei adam. Until I go in and come out, because this is what people need to do. This is human nature. So we already see what's going to become a theme in our session today, that there's an ambivalence about the act of going to the bathroom. Is it a disgraceful, shameful place where the angels can't enter, where our holy celestial aspects of our humanity must be left outside, and here we have to do this base animal thing? Or is it what Abaye says, that actually this is the nature of human beings? That sheken darkan shel bnei adam, that going to the bathroom is something every single person needs to do, and so we just want the angels to protect us during this time, but don't leave. Hover over and protect. If you think about the Midrash, that why did Moshe always find Paro in the Nile? That the Midrash says that Paro would go into the Nile to relieve himself so that his subjects would not know that he needed to go to the bathroom like everyone else. But by entering the Nile, it would seem as if he was godlike and did not need to go to the bathroom. So here Abaye is saying, no, going to the bathroom, that's part of how we were created. The bracha even implies that that's how we were created by chokhmah. That's the wisdom of our creation, that we can get the waste out of our body so that the toxins don't build up, so that we can function. So that's all what you should say before going into the bathroom. And it reflects this ambivalence about whether the bathroom is like something we really wish we didn't have to do, or whether it's part of Hashem's design of creation and really something that is just a part of human nature. So now we get to our bracha. Kina Peik Omer, when you leave the bathroom, you should say, Baruch Asher Yatzar Adam b'chokhmah. So we don't see the full opening here. That's a later addition during the Gaonic period. But we just say, blessed is the one who Yatzar Adam b'chokhmah, created mankind in wisdom. And we get to that question of whose wisdom here? So grammatically, Asher Yatzar Adam b'chokhmah implies that God used wisdom to create human being. And when we look at the wisdom literature, especially in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is sometimes personified as a semi-angelic or a divine being. But here it's being used as a way of describing the way human beings were fashioned, that there is wisdom in the way we were fashioned, nothing short of miraculous, as we'll see in the bracha. And then we have the rest of the text of the bracha that's familiar. V'arava Nekavim, Nekavim, Cholim, made us with hollow organs and hollow tubes. Galui v'yadua lifnei chisech v'decha, it is known before your holy throne. She'im yipatech echad mehem, o yisatem echad mehem, if one should open or shut when it's not supposed to. I efshar la'amod lefanecha. And that's the end. It would not be possible to stand before you. So that's what the Baraita says we should be saying. But now there's a whole discussion. And I'm realizing you may not, I'm going to just scroll down so you can see the Chatima on the share screen. So there's a discussion about how should you sign off this blessing. My Chatim, what should be the Chatima, the ending of this blessing? So Amar Rav says, Rofeh Cholim. We should be saying, God heals the sick. But Shmuel and Rav are first generation Amoraim, and they're always arguing with one another. Shmuel says, Kashav'enu Abba l'chul me'alma katzirei. Abaye, you're making everybody sick. You're making it seem like every single person in the world is a chole. If you're implying that going to the bathroom means that you're sick, Rofeh Cholim, you're implying that it's not just a natural act, and that going to the bathroom is something awry with your bodily systems. That's clearly not the case, because we all need to do it. So there's that ambivalence again. Is going to the bathroom something we expect as a part of human nature, or is it something shameful, disgraceful, that we're embarrassed about? So Abaye makes the point that that indeed going to the bathroom is really a part of Rofeh Cholim, where, sorry, not Abaye, Rav says it should be Rofeh Cholim, where Shmuel says, no, we shouldn't say Rofeh Cholim. That implies where everybody is sick when they go to the bathroom. Instead, Rofeh Chol Basar. God is the healer of all flesh. So it's an interesting phrase. Rofeh Chol Basar is not a phrase that emphasizes Adam and humanity. Rather, it emphasizes our animal nature. Rofeh Chol Basar, that we are all just a part of flesh, of every living creature that needs to create waste. My 7-year-old, our son asked me the other day, well, how do you define that something is alive? So we got into a whole discussion about, well, what does it mean to breathe and to create waste? And so Rofeh Chol Basar ties humans to the animals, that God is the healer of all animals. But again, that healing implies that there's something aberrant about needing to go to the bathroom. So here we have a discussion between later Amoraim. Rav Sheshet says, Mafli la'asot. We should include this phrase, Mafli la'asot. God does wondrous things. And so Rav Papa finds a compromise, and this is something that Rav Papa is known for. We should say both of them. Rofecho basar umafli la'asot. So the only one that gets left out is Rofech cholim. But we get this idea that we should be ending this bracha saying that God is the creator of all flesh and does wondrous things. So where does this phrase umafli la'asot come from? I didn't include it in the source sheet because it's a bit of a tangent, but does anyone know where the phrase comes from? It's a hapak legomenon. It only appears once in all of Tanakh. Any guesses? You can feel free to type it into the chat or unmute yourself if you know. This is kind of like a Chidon Tanakh question. It's a very unusual phrase. Umafli la'asot comes from the book of Judges. I'm going to just screen share the verses with you. It comes from a haftorah that we read about the parents of Shimshon, where Manoach Manoach and his wife are approached by an angel. His wife is unnamed, and told that they are going to have a child. This child will become Shimshon, the strongest person in our tradition, but who ultimately ended up blinded by the Philistines. And so they get this good news from the angel, and Manoach presses the angel to stay and says, stay, we want to make a meal for you. We want to thank you, really drawing on the story of Abraham and the angels as well. And when Abraham and Sarah found out that they would give birth to Yitzchak. So here you can see in Judges Shoftim Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk 17. Can you see my screen for that? Manoach asks the angel, thanks, Mi shemecha ki avod dvarach v'chi badnucha. What's your name? Because when your words come true, we want to honor you. Maybe like we'll name the baby after you. Vayomer lo malach Hashem, lama zeh tishal ishmi. Why are you asking my name? V'hu pel'i. My name is wonder, miracle. This translation is unknowable, but it's that shorish, that root of pei lamed aleph, which means wondrous. So then look in the next verse. Vayikach Manoach et gedi ha'izim. Manoach makes an offering of goats, et mincha, and the mincha offering. Vaya'al al hatzur. He goes up on the rock. La'Hashem. Umafli la'asot. Umanoach ve'ishto ro'im. And this wondrous thing happened. The JPS translation says meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Umanoach ve'ishto ro'im. Now the commentators say umafli la'asot means a fire emerged from heaven and engulfed the offering. And what happens next, which we won't go through, is Manoach and his wife fear we're going to get killed. Manoach says we're going to get killed by God. And Manoach's wife says, no, if God wanted to kill us, God wouldn't have just told us that we were going to have a baby, and God would have killed us already when the fire came out. It's okay. This is God's wondrous presence. So this phrase, umafli la'asot, comes from this very strange episode where God's presence is wondrously appearing and gobbling up the offering of thanks for infertility being resolved, that will result in the birth of the strongest person ever who has this strange weakness around his hair and ultimately ends up blinded. So I'm curious if anyone has a conclusion to draw from it. This is the only place Mafli Lasot shows up in our liturgy and in Tanakh. And it, to my mind, speaks to this idea of the mystery of how our bodies work, the things that we don't understand. And that's how we end up concluding this blessing, on this note of wonder. Interestingly, when the Gemara finishes this section, which we just learned through together, the next thing in the Gemara is Hanichnas lishon al mitato, a person who goes to sleep in his bed, Omer, Mishma Yisrael ad v'hayayim shamoa, the Omer Baruch Mapil Chavle Shena Eleinai. So the next passage is all about what do you say when you go to bed. And what's very interesting about this is the bracha for going to the bathroom. Does it fall more in the category of the preceding baraita, where it's when you enter into a place of danger, you should say these things? Or does it fall more in the latter bracha of saying Shema, which is this is something you should do every day, all the time. This is a regular occurrence. One might argue that Asher Yatzar and Shema are similar, that you say them going to sleep and going to the bathroom are both times when potential danger lurks, right? That they're times of vulnerability, they're liminal times. Will we wake up in the morning? We don't take that for granted. Will we emerge unscathed from going to the bathroom? Will our bodies work as they ought to? And so both of these are brachot and passages really drawing forward this concept of vulnerability before God. So any questions or comments so far before we begin our breaking down of the other word choices within the bracha? And we're a small enough group, you can feel free to unmute yourself or type a question into the chat. And one of my teachers taught me that when you ask a question on Zoom, take a sip of water because it gives people a chance to chat it or unmute.
So thank you. One thing that's first off, this is actually, it's not just a Haftarah, it's next week's Haftarah.
Thank you.
But yeah, so one thing that I'm thinking about with Shimshon is it's interesting, it ties into Shimshon. I don't know whether this is whether I'm overreading this or not, but Shimshon.
Is this F speaking? I can't see on the.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, this is F.
Oh, as soon as you said it's next week's Haftarah, I'm like, that must be F. Thank you.
So Shimshon is, I don't want to say just about as much as any other character in the Tanakh is tied, his identity is tied to his body and body type. As I want to say more, it maybe not, maybe I won't say more than any other character in the Tanakh, but probably as much as any character in the Tanakh. And throughout his 3-chapter narrative, there are cases where he both uses his body l'shem shamayim and uses his body sort of the opposite l'shem shamayim. And so if one wants to read into why Shimshon, one could possibly extract those answers. I don't want to say that's exactly what people were thinking about when they put in there, but you could go down that road if one wanted to.
Thank you, F. That's a brilliant comment because I think it really picks up on the ambivalence in this bracha as to whether our bodies are gifts from Hashem created in wisdom or whether our bodies are just vessels for our soul that lead us to sin and cause us, that there's like a shameful aspect to our bodies. And I think Shimshon's story gets at both of those. And it also gets at, an idea that's very prominent in the Christian tradition, that our bodies lead us to sin and are really just vessels for the true holy nature of ourselves, which is our souls. The Jewish idea is more complicated, as we're going to see, that there is both a physical and a spiritual dimension to our beings. And our physical dimension is sometimes considered shamefully and often considered as being created in the image of God. So it's actually a perfect segue to what we're going to look at next, which is why the bracha opens with this language of creation. So you'll recall that the bracha opens with Asher Yatzar et ha'adam b'chokhmah uvara vo nekavim nekavim. So I'm counting these two verbs used for creation. That God Yatzar created human beings in wisdom, uvaravo, and created within them, nekavim nekavim chalulim chalulim. Those sentences are not parallel, right? Yatzar and bara are parallel. They're two different verbs for creation, as we'll soon see. But et ha'adam b'chokhmah and nekavim nekavim chalulim chalulim. It's as if the tubes and openings are parallel to ha'adam b'chokhmah, that the wisdom of the creation is the fact that we have these many openings and hollow organs and tubes, that we are so complex, that we have the ability to compensate to a degree when there is an illness, and that we have been able to discover ways in some situations to compensate for malfunctions in these nekavim chalulim chalulim. But ultimately, there's a chokhmah, there's a wisdom that all of our medical science in the world cannot compensate for, that all of us are mortal and all of us will eventually die. And as we have seen so painfully during this pandemic, that we cannot control who lives and who dies as much as we would like to. And so we get to these verses, Yatzar and Bara. And of course, these come from the Breshit narrative, from the Genesis narrative. You'll recall that the creation of humankind appears twice in the opening of Breshit. As Rabbi Soloveitchik famously wrote, there's Adam 1 and Adam 2. There's the first narrative in Breshit that we read on Simchat Torah and that we know so well of Breshit bara Elokim, where the verb bara is used over and over, and we count the days of creation. And in that narrative, people are created on the 6th day, towards the end of the day. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tsalmo, b'tselem Elokim bara oto, zachar u'nekava bara otam. And so that verb bara appears 3 times in that verse of the creation of mankind, that God created mankind in God's image, and B'Tselem and Salmo appears a second time, Zachar u'Nekava bara otam. that both male and female were created. And so that verbs all three times speaks to this narrative where people are created towards the end of the creation narrative and rule over the animals and are the pinnacle of creation. But the next passage of the creation of mankind, if you contrast that to Bereshit chapter 2, we have the verb yatzar. So unlike in chapter 1, where bara implies creation from nothing, yatzar implies creation from something. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et ha'adam, afar min ha'adama. God created Adam from the dust of the earth, vayipach ba'apav, and breathed into him, nishmat chayim, the soul of life. Vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. There's a weird extra comma in the Hebrew, sorry about that. And only then did man become a human being. Very interesting language here, that the yatzar has to do with forming the body, and the soul is blown into the body. So the soul that makes Adam alive is distinct from the body itself. Unlike in Perek Aleph, where bara implies creating a whole person, in Perek Bet, yatzar has to do with creating the body, and only then the soul is blown in. The nefesh, the neshama, is placed inside. So again, is this body a vessel that was created to hold the true life, which is our soul? Or is our body part of B'Tselem Elokim? Is our body, and I think this is certainly the normative Jewish understanding, is our body a part of the way we understand our mission in living a life that is B'Tselem Elokim, B'Tselem Elohim? So the Yatzar narrative continues. If you look at the next couple of verses, Vayitad Adonai Elohim gan be'eden mikedem, vayasem sham et hadam Asher Yatzar. So man was placed in the Garden of Eden. And then a few verses later, we get the creation of woman, of Eve. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim min ha'adama kol chayat hasadeh v'et kol ha'of hashamayim. So all the animals were similarly created after man from the ground. And brought to man to be named. And only then after that does Adam become lonely and woman is created. So yatzar here is a verb applied to animals and people and has to do with being created from something. And also is associated with the idea of man's dominance over animals in some way. But yatzar and bara are often paired together. These two different aspects of creation, if you want to call them the physical and the spiritual, the physical and the psychological, to get at one of our opening questions, these verbs are also paired together in Yeshayahu, which I show you here on the source sheet, source 5. Yotzer or uvoreh choshech. We're familiar from our liturgy, we're expecting it to say oseh shalom uvoreh takol, but it doesn't say that. The original verse is oseh shalom uvoreh ra. I form the light, I, God, form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. Ani Adonai oseh kol ela. I am the God, I am the Lord that does all these things. So in our liturgy in the Shema, we say that God is Yotzer Or, God is the creation of light, Uvoreh Choshech, and creates darkness. Oseh Shalom, maker of peace, Uvoreh Ra. We say Uvoreh Takol, that God creates everything. But the original verse is Boreh Ra, this recognition that everything comes from God, that there is no thing that exists outside of God, that just as light and darkness are parallel, Shalom and Ra are parallel. Peace and wholeness and Ra, evil, brokenness, are paired together, and they all emanate from God. Theologically, very challenging verse, which is one of the reasons it was changed in our liturgy to Oseh Shalom Uvoreh Takol. The Gemara actually continues in Brachot to discuss this exact theological problem, that Uvoreh et Hakol implies, okay, yes, it includes Uvoreh Ra, but we don't need to be reminded of that in our liturgy. It's so problematic. So perhaps as we're saying this bracha, we are reminded by the use of Yotzer and Bara, Yatzar and Bara, that all aspects of creation, the parts which we appreciate and we love and we think are wise, and the painful, difficult, broken ones that we don't understand, all emanate from something greater than us. It is the ultimate verse about humility, that we may think we know so much about our bodies, and yet there are things we cannot control. There are mysteries we don't understand. There is heartbreak that we cannot answer. And so ultimately, pairing these two verbs together reminds us that everything in our bodies, the good and the bad, the physical and the spiritual, comes from something greater than us, comes from God, comes from something that we cannot understand. I'm going to pause to just acknowledge a wonderful comment in the chat from Marion, going back to the Yatzar and Bara, thinking about stewardship rather than dominance. So thank you for that comment, because I think it gets at this idea that if we are to think of our bodies in one narrative as like this physical thing that our souls are then poured into, we might think that our souls ought to rule over our bodies, keep them under control, keep them from sinning. But if we use that language of stewardship rather than dominance, much as we think of humankind being a steward for the earth rather than v'chivshuha, dominating it or conquering it, we might apply that same language to our bodies, that we are stewards of our bodies that are created at Tselem Elokim, and we, in using our soul, in using our willpower, in using our wisdom, must take care of these bodies that were created at Tselem Elokim. So that's a beautiful image, and thank you, Marion, for that comment. I want to move us forward now to one other question that was raised about the parallel language, about Nekavim, Nekavim, Chalulim, Chalulim. So where does that come from? We just read about the earlier part of the bracha, about Yatzar et ha'adam b'chokhmah uvaravo. But where do we get this language of Nekavim, Nekavim, Chalulim, Chalulim? It's not a common phraseology. And in fact, if you look it up in a concordance, Nekavim does not appear in that form. So there is one idea that this bracha is drawn from language of the book of Yechezkel. Here, Yechezkel the prophet is chastising Ben Adam, chastising people. So here we've got that Asher Yatzar et Adam, the emphasis on humanity, and telling him to take up a lamentation for Melech Tzor, the king of Tyre, who is this example in Yechezkel's language of arrogance and of thinking that he is above God. Ko amar Adonai Elohim, atah chotem tochlit, malech chochma uchlil yofi. That you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and flawless in beauty. You were in Gan Eden, you were perfect. You had every precious stone. And then we have in the Hebrew, Malechet tupecha unekavecha bach, v'yom hi baracha konano. Very complex language, poetic language. The workmanship of your settings and of your sockets was in you, prepared the day you were created. Yechezkel here is criticizing the king of Tyre for not appropriately appreciating the blessing that is tupecha unekavecha. Your settings, tupecha literally drums, but it's understood here again to mean hollow things, much like chalulim. Unekavecha, your sockets, your holes, your openings, that your creator created within you. So here we have an echo of the language of our bracha, and you can see in the Targum Yonatan, the way the Targum explains it is that the king of Tyre was pampered with an abundance of good things as if he lived in Gan Eden, but you became haughty, your heart became haughty, and you did not appreciate, and the Targum uses chalulim and nekavim, that language. You did not appreciate the workings of your body, without which it would be impossible for you to survive. Same language as in our bracha. They were prepared as part of you from the day that you were created. So the idea that arrogance leads one to take for granted bodily functions, without which one could not be alive and preside over the vast riches that the king of Tyre had. So it's an obscure passage, an obscure language that's in our translation, but it gets at the idea of humility and appreciation of the blessing and the mystery that is our body that was lacking in here. I want to take us to one other verse that I didn't include in the source sheet, but I think gets at the language of kiseh kvodecha. So does anyone know, where does that language come from, kiseh kvodecha? We already said that the Gemara calls the bathroom beit ha-kiseh. Where does the language of kiseh kvodecha actually come from? There's our musical interlude. So strangely enough, kiseh kvodecha is also a hapax legomenon. It only appears in that, kiseh appears lots, kavod appears lots, but kiseh kavod appears a few times, but kiseh kvodecha, that exact phrasing, appears once in the entire Tanakh in the book of Yirmiyahu. So hopefully you can see Yirmiyahu on the screen. What Yirmiyahu has to say is that in Yirmiyahu's prophecy, and he's of course a prophet after the destruction, after the exile to Bavel, Yirmiyahu answers the Israelites in a time of painful exile, and offers a source of comfort. So here it is. Yirmiyahu speaks to God and says, Hama'os tim asat Yehuda, have you rejected Yehuda and Sion? Madua hikitanu, this is a very painful phrase to read right now in the midst of the pandemic. Madua hikitanu, why have you smitten us? Ve'ein lanu marpeh, and there is no cure, and there is no healing. Kavel shalom, we hope for wholeness. Ve'ein tov, ule'et marpeh, v'hine ba'ata, we hope for a cure, we hope for healing, and instead we meet terror. These words really resonate today. Yadanu Adonai rish'anu, avon avotenu ki chatanu lach. We think that our wickedness, our sin, the sins of our fathers, are not caring for one another. Avon is also associated with a lack of empathy for one another. That's why we have been punished. And here, this is this biblical idea that when we do mitzvot, when we follow Hashem, we're not punished, but when we sin, that's when we are punished, and illness is a form of punishment in the biblical imagination. Now, we don't, in our modern understanding, view individual illness, chas v'shalom, as a punishment for individual sin, and yet we still recognize on a human level that our human failings have so much to do with how widespread this pandemic has gotten and why certain sectors of society suffer so much more than others. But listen to this last verse that Yirmiyahu says, Al tin'at laman shemecha, al tinabel kiseh kvadecha. Do not disown us, do not dishonor kiseh kvadecha, your glorious throne. Zechor al tafer britcha itanu. So that phrase, kiseh kvadecha, is asking God, remember your covenant with us. Galui v'yadua lifnei kiseh kvadecha. It is obvious, it is known before your kiseh kvadecha. Why that phrase? Why not just God's holiness? Because kiseh kvadecha is the language of covenant, that even in the midst of illness and suffering and evil, we are in covenant with God, that we are created in the image of God, that we are in covenant as a people with one another and with the Creator. And so Yirmiyahu's words, Al tafer britecha itanu, Al tanabel kiseh kvadecha, Zechor, remember, don't break your covenant, don't disgrace your holy throne. When we say those words, kiseh kvadecha, we're thinking of this larger narrative of God, asking God not to forsake us, to watch over us, much as we ask the angels to wait outside the outhouse. We're asking God to watch over us and protect us. Now, we have about 15 minutes left. I just want to do one more source, and then we're gonna open this up for discussion. That line from Yirmiyahu gets us thinking, and hopefully you can see the source sheet back up here, about that ambivalence we first touched on, whether going to the bathroom is a part of what we need to do naturally, a part of the way God fashioned us in wisdom, or whether it's something shameful to be embarrassed about. Earlier in Masechet Brachot, the Gemara says that if you're in the middle of davening and you have to pass wind, you're supposed to step away from your davening area and actually say a phrase very similar to our bracha. You're supposed to say, Ribono shel olam, Yatzar tanu, you have created us, that verb Yatzar, Nekavim, Nekavim, Chalulim, Chalulim. You created us with these openings and hollow organs. Galui v'yadua lifnecha, it is known before you, but here a different ending. Cherpatanu uklimatenu, our iniquity, our shame, our disgrace, b'chayenu, uva acharitenu rima v'tola'ah. And after we die, that our end is but maggots and worms. And then you go back to your davening. Can you imagine? This has not entered our common practice. But what we're supposed to be doing, according to this Gemara, is that when we need to pass gas, we're supposed to say, oh, I'm reminded of my base physical nature. I should be embarrassed and ashamed of it. And I'm ultimately going to be dust and ashes. And only then, as you cast off this bodily function, do you resume praying. So that reading, it appears to imply that our physical nature is something we ought to be ashamed of and divorced from, that we really should go back to the Yatzar idea, that our bodies are just a cavity to hold our soul, but it's really our soul that's doing the spiritual work, as opposed to the language of bara, where our body and soul are b'tselem Elokim, and a sign of wisdom. So this ambivalence plays out back and forth in our language, not just around this bracha, but throughout our tradition, about whether disease ought to be a source of shame in its association with punishment, or whether disease is just a natural imbalance in the Nekavim chalulim of our bodies, and we ought to thank God for the good and the bad, because God is creator of all. So there's a wonderful essay by Rabbi Dan Orenstein that I came across when I was a student at the Jewish Theological Seminary doing my master's, and I love this essay. I highly recommend it. Rabbi Orenstein talks about this tension as a daily mini drama, that this tension reflects when we go into the bathroom, that we view it as a potential place of danger, because it's a place where we stop and think for a moment about our vulnerability, about the fact that we're all human, we all have a body, none of us will live forever. And to contemplate our mortality just by going to the bathroom is a terrifying and powerful thing. And it reminds me of something I learned from Rabbi Shai Held, I think at like Yom Kippur at Kilat Hadar circa 2002, where Rabbi Held taught that beautiful passage from the Gemara that talks about how a person should have a petek in each pocket, reminding them, Anochi afar va'efer, I am but dust and ashes. And on the other hand, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, for me the world was created. This duality between our physical nature, that we are nothing but dust and ashes, we are created from dust and our bodies won't last forever, and Bishvili nivra ha'olam, that each of us is created b'tselem Elohim and has a role to play and a unique function in the world that only we as individuals can fulfill, and both are true. This bracha captures that duality. Asher Yatzar, Asher bara. It captures that tension between our physical and our spiritual natures. And it captures that real terror and fear when we encounter our own mortality, as well as the supreme gratitude for when things work as they ought to, and that we don't take our health for granted, and that we experience that with humility and gratitude each day. So I'm going to pause there so that we have a few minutes for discussion. The rest of the source sheet, sources 10, 11, 12, and 13, are beautiful passages for modern thinkers using this bracha. You can feel free to respond to those or just read them for your own. I'll tell you that they have to do with changing diapers, with Crohn's and colitis, with infertility, and with urinary dysfunction. And I ended, the last link is a link to a beautiful song by Rabbi Josh Wershof to the words of Asher Yatzar. So let's open it up for discussion, for questions, as we meditate on this beautiful bracha. I think, Meir, you were first.
I have no questions. I just enjoyed it immensely, so I'll leave it open to others.
Thank you.
Yes, I would just like to say that this was beautifully done, and you obviously know the sources very well. I would love to get to know you better. It was wonderful.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual. I know a lot of the themes in here are things that inform the way I think about the holy work that I'm privileged to do as a doctor, and how much we can't take for granted, and the infinite ways the body can go wrong or go right, and really appreciate that. As others are thinking of comments or questions, I'm looking at some of the questions that were raised in the chat that we didn't get to. If there are ones that people want to resurface. I think we did touch on a lot of them. We didn't touch specifically on the physical and psychological aspects, but we certainly could read, instead of reading it chalulim, the literal like closing and opening, the verb yisatem echad mehem has to do with ma'ayanot and water. Every time it appears in Tanakh, it has to do with the well springs being stopped up. But maybe it's not just the physical stopping up of, that image that my kids recalled. My daughter reminded me that there's an image of someone having a heart attack that, we think of Nekavim, chalulim as being like the physical closing or opening when it shouldn't be closed or opening, not being able to breathe when one ought to, or the arteries clogging up, or bleeding when one ought to be stopping. But actually, what if it's being physically or spiritually open or closed? What if it's being psychologically in a place of darkness and praying that God should open us up to that place of openness. So maybe this bracha could also be a meditation on our spirituality, being closed versus open, our mental health, being in closed versus open places and being open to help. And I see some more comments in the chat. Thank you, Molly, about the shame idea. Very, very problematic. And I think it's one of the reasons that it got kind of phased out of our mainstream Jewish understanding of illness. There is a Gemara in Brachot on Amud Hey that talks about these three stories of rabbis who get sick. And all three times the question is asked, Chavivina lecha yisurim, are your sufferings welcome to you? This idea that, like, do you think suffering is welcome because it expiates your sin in some way? But all three rabbis answer, lo hen velo scharan, not the sufferings and not their rewards. No, I don't want to be sick. I want to get better. And the person who visits them takes his hand and he raises him. And there's the Gemara ends with that a person can't release themselves from jail. So there's this idea that, no, we don't welcome this suffering. In fact, that may be a more Christian idea, that the suffering, there's something good or holy about it. No, we say, no, that's part of the way of the world, but we don't welcome it. Rather, we have to heal each other and help each other through it. And so I love what you said, Molly, in the chat, that reminding us of our physical nature, our vulnerability, our mortality is meant to humble us, is meant to help us see the connection between all people, that no one is immune, that everyone is mortal. Many of you may have read Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, which I highly recommend, which gets us the idea that, like, we forget our own individual vulnerability. And when we remember that, it helps us empathize and be there for others in their moments of need.
I wanted to just mention one other thing. I always thought that the part where it says, meant that if I were ill or I was disabled, I wouldn't be able to stand before you in prayer. I wouldn't be able to actually pray the Amidah.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think it gets at something someone, maybe it was you, Marian, put earlier in the chat about disability and what does that mean? The Kenneth Prager article speaks to this, that rather than say that, oh, if that I couldn't pray for you, it's that a recognition that prayer is a uniquely human thing. This is similar to what Daniel put in the chat just now, that our physical nature isn't what enables us to pray. It's our spiritual nature, it's our neshama that enables us to pray. And recognizing God as the source of all of, as we saw in the verse from Yeshayahu, of everything, perhaps could open us up in vulnerability to prayer. But I think it definitely does raise many, many questions about how we understand disability, how we understand illness. Some of the modern sources I included are meditations on this painful reality. Someone struggling with infertility or afflicted by an illness, we don't want them, chas v'shalom, for a moment to think that this was inflicted upon them from God. And yet, we look for meaning. We look for ways to find empathy and healing and growth from these experiences of suffering. Now, we're at 12:55, and I know we do need to end, so there's time to go to the next session.
I'm going to say time to go to the next session. Who knows what brachot may be said during those next 5 minutes?
If people did not formally, thank you so much, Andrea, for being here, for teaching us. Did you have any final thoughts before I make my one quick announcement?
Sure, yeah. So I think the final thought, and this is maybe kind of what Molly put in the chat, that being able to hold at the same time our physical and our spiritual dimensions, our angelic natures and our humble, vulnerable bodies, being able to hold those both at the same time, may it enable us to both be open to the experience of vulnerability and our own mortality, and use that to live each day as its fullest, to experience and appreciate the brachot and the blessings in our lives, to enable us to reach out and help others who are in need of healing. And I wish for all of us good health and happiness, and to those in need of healing, a refuat hanefesh, a refuat haguf. And thank you all for your participation and discussion today.
Thank you so much, Andrea. For those who didn't register or didn't get the email or lost the email, in the chat, there is a Google Doc shared link with all the Zoom session information. You can also email shavuot.chairs@keynote.org if anyone needs any help or support.
And the next class is going to be given by Helana in about 3 to 5 minutes. So everybody, look forward to seeing you again. And Andrea, thank you so much.